Kakugachugwandayo Hitsuyoaku, Sovereign Identity Architect, at your service. Let's lock in. So, in order to really talk about branding and how to make it an effective tool in the modern era, we're going to have to really step back about 10,000 years or so, you know what I'm saying, to get to the origins, the indigenous origins, the ancient indigenous origins of what this concept even entails, right? So let's take this to the first principles. Let's boil this down to the very axioms at the root of the system that we are discussing. One way that we can do this is through etymology, right? So let's deal with the etymology of the word brand, because it comes from the Old Norse word brandr, which means to burn, right? This is the firebrand, or you can even think of it as a torch, right? A burning piece of wood, right? When we get into the original purpose of branding based on this aspect of its origin, the fire was used to create a permanent or what's known as indelible mark. That mark was used to denote ownership and source on livestock and goods, right? So the farmers would brand their cattle in order to prevent theft. Artisans, craftsmen would burn their symbol onto their work, almost as a form of early marketing, early self-promotion. When people saw that mark, they'd ask, who made this table, this chair? And we would automatically be able to associate the quality of craftsmanship with a specific producer. So this is where we really have to get into the nature of fire if we want to understand branding. Because when we get into the archetypal, the symbolic, relevant connections regarding fire, we see that it is a near universal symbol for transformation, for purification, and most crucially in this conversation, it deals with the illumination and the awareness of perception, the illumination of consciousness, the coming forth by day, the Pert Emheru, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, yeah? The rising sun was often seen as the Benu, the origins of the phoenix archetype, right? So we understand that at the most pivotal, universally defined level, fire is directly connected to the awakening of consciousness. It is the tool that brought humanity out of darkness and into the light. It is what made the world visible and understandable. It is in fact our mastery of fire that constitutes one of the most pivotal fucking turning points in all of human consciousness. I need you all to understand the meme of fire is one of the most defining features of the human brand. Fire, our mastery of fire, is our brand identity at its core. So let's bring this now into a modern context, because I'm going to go deeper on that ancient side of it, but we're going to circle around to the modern side, and then we're going to go back to the future. You see what I'm saying? The original brand, fire, made the owner or the source of a product visible and distinct. The modern brand, which is the art of guiding perception, manipulating perception, shaping and steering perception, makes a product's identity, values, and promises visible and distinct in the crowded marketplace. It cuts through the darkness, the noise, the static of competition and uncertainty to create a clear path, a clear point of awareness within a consumer or a client's mind. So just the same way that fire gives clarity and the power to see, a good brand in the modern sense is designed to give the client or the consumer or the community clarity and the power to choose. They also give the feeling of knowing the product's true essence. I need you to understand, people don't buy products at all. They buy associations. They're buying proxies, personality proxies. They're buying things that help them express themselves. It's less about the product and more about the emotional connection that they feel to the thing. And that is why modern marketing and branding and advertising has been utilizing all of the ancient indigenous meaning-making techniques that we would call mythology in order to push and sell. Because ultimately, they're not selling you a product, they're selling you the perception of a thing. Nike never sold you shoes. They're selling you transcendence via victory. They're selling you the power to overcome obstacles. You get me? Coca-Cola isn't selling soda. Not at all. They're actually selling you happiness via communal indulgence. A Coke and a smile. They even put names on the cans now so that way you can grab the Coke of your friends that has your friend's name on it and you can give it to them. Do you understand now? They're not selling you the product, they're selling you ideals and archetypes. The modern brand aims to be the torch, the firebrand. You are looking to be the Prometheus that lights up your community's mental scape, your audience's mental scape, guiding their perception toward a singular defined idea. That is the origin of branding. And since I spoke about Prometheus, let's delve even deeper into that mythological stance to again see how branding and our mastery of fire is ultimately the defining feature of the human product, the human catalog. So Prometheus steals fire from the gods, right? In some accounts it's from Hephaestus's forge. In other accounts, it's from the chariot of Apollo, the chariot of the sun. This fire becomes the ultimate branding tool. It becomes the mechanism that permanently marks humanity as distinct and separate from the animals. Our mastery of fire is what differentiated the human brand from the rest of the living ecosystem. It gave us illumination and power. This is the point that ultimately changed human development forever, because this fire was more than just physical heat and light. It symbolically represents what the Greeks called techne, which is skills, crafts, and the arts. It allowed humans to forge tools, cook food, and build shelters. This fire, this techne, this creative spark and impulse that we now symbolize using the light bulb, you get me? This is how we learn to apply reason and skill to the world. Understand that a tool is an extension of one's inner will into the environment in order to create a particular change in said environment. This again is ontological engineering. This is aesthetic manipulation. Prometheus' gift of fire to humanity fundamentally rebranded us in the eyes of Zeus and the greater cosmos as a whole. Humanity could no longer be seen as a subservient beast of burden slave race. They were beings with true ontological identity. They were real. They had brought themselves into a level of the game where their imagination, their decisions, and their potential for creative output could spell the end of reality as the gods knew it up until that point. So understand that this whole entire myth is about guiding perception. Prometheus in this myth wanted the gods to perceive humanity as worthy, even as Zeus wanted to keep them in the dark. Does this sound familiar? Does this sound just like the Christian mythos, where early humanity was told not to consume from the tree of knowledge, for they would die? But then the snake comes and says, eat from the tree and ye too shall be gods. Isn't this the same exact story? The descent of illumination onto the human species, the inner revelation of the creative fire, the soul. I need you to understand that a successful brand, just like this fire, changes how the world perceives the object it marks. When Fiji slaps their name on a bottle of water, you look at it different than you would if that bottle of water was just unlabeled. You look at it different. You're more likely to drink that bottle of Fiji water than you would be to drink that exact same bottle unlabeled. Interesting. So let's get into what Prometheus earned himself for essentially rebranding humanity. He was chained to a rock for an eagle to eat his liver daily. That alone itself is an indelible yet very painful brand that he took on for his own defiance against the gods, against Mount Olympus. This punishment becomes the permanent mark that's used as a warning from Mount Olympus to anyone who challenges their status quo. Does this sound familiar? Does this sound like how corporations and government and the military-industrial complex tends to operate right now? So what you're seeing here is a form of negative branding. They have essentially cast the archetype of the rebel in such a way that makes it aversive, offensive to the general population, so they don't try it themselves. So please understand that in this light, in this framing of the Prometheus myth, it isn't just about getting a tool, a technique, a technology. It's about the defining, permanent shift in identity and awareness that the tool creates. The revelation of the mechanics of fire to humanity is the most significant rebranding event in our mythology, in our anthology. And this is why the primal ontological loop branding system that I have rediscovered, resurrected from deep in the bowels of the archetypal narratives, the many archetypal narratives that our ancestors have left for us to build upon. That's why this system starts tool first, utility based. It wasn't until we were able to utilize fire that we were rebranded by fire. Branding itself is tied to this very concept. So that means that there was no human brand until we mastered fire. This is why I deal in utility-driven, identity-first branding, because it is our mastery of the tools. It is our mastery of tool creation. It is our mastery of world building that identifies us as human and differentiates us from the rest of the animal kingdom, who does not have this level of advanced manipulation capability on the ontological, aesthetic, and epistemological levels. Let's wind back to those Norse origins of the word brand, because obviously branding existed. The concept of branding, the concept of meaning making, imbuing a symbol with meaning and then spreading that symbol amongst a community in order to create a shared identity. That concept is as old as fire. That concept is as old as mythology. That concept is as old as language. But when we deal with the Norse connection to this shit, in terms of the fact that the word itself comes from that dialect, that lexicon, that cultural system, then it makes sense that we look at Odin in terms of this notion of branding as the art of awareness and perception. Let's look at the myth of Odin's sacrifice at the world tree Yggdrasil in order to provide just a little more nuance, a little more sauce to this well-cooked meal that is being presented to you at this moment. Because this idea forms the true identity, the ultimate brand, the concept of forging oneself, one's identity through suffering, illumination, and indelible self-marking. Odin hangs himself from the world tree, pierced by his own spear for 9 days and 9 nights. Again, this is a self-inflicted brand. It is the physical suffering required to acquire a higher form of perception. Now let's take this into modern branding terms. Because in modern branding, they tell you that you want to build your entire brand around solving a pain point within a particular niche. A pain point. Didn't I just say Odin pierced his own side with a spear while hanging himself from the world tree? He was focused on a particular pain point and overcoming that pain point in order to gain a higher form of perception. When we talk about the word niche, it's interesting that we use the word niche in branding, marketing, and advertising, because that word is uniquely and utterly connected to the science of ecology, the science of environmental systems. A niche is a particular role that an organism plays within an ecosystem in order to help sustain and maintain the overall balance and health of that ecosystem. You're very familiar with different forms of niches. You might know it as the food chain. Some animals fall in the niche of prey. You know, first order producers, first order consumers, second order consumers, primary, secondary, tertiary. You know, these are the different niches that exist. Some animals are vegetarian. Some animals are herbivores, I should say. Some animals are insectivores. They only eat other insects. Some animals are omnivores. They'll eat everything. They'll give everything a little taste. Some animals are carnivores and they only like flesh. But yet each one plays a particular role in the overall environment that helps that environment sustain and maintain itself over a long period of time. So here we are at the world tree, the tree of life, which could also be symbolic of the biological tree of life, the 5 kingdoms of biological life. Odin hangs himself from this tree in order to overcome a pain point. He is literally marking himself with agony while transforming his physical state to access a spiritual one. So again, in modern terms, this is paying the ultimate price to gain a distinct and powerful brand identity. In Odin's case, that brand is that of the All-Father who has stared into the abyss of non-existence and lives to tell the tale. That tale becomes the narrative foundation of every brand campaign, every marketing campaign, every advertising campaign needs that story, the overcoming of a pain point. That is what builds trust in the audience. You have to show them that there is a way, and you have to prove that you survived for real, and that's why Odin had to mark himself. He had to brand himself around the thing he survived. So let's talk about the ultimate reward that Odin received for paying the ultimate price to differentiate his brand, because that reward is known as the runes. And these runes weren't just a system of letters. Get that out of your fucking head. That's some goofy shit. These are symbols. And we know that symbols bypass the conscious mind and directly interact with the subconscious, unconscious layer. This is why every brand comes with a logo. So understand that the runes are a system of branding symbols that Odin received that ultimately represent the fundamental cosmic secrets, universal patterns, and the keys to magic. But let's step back to what Arthur C. Clarke said. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So what the runes truly are is a symbolic representation of the source code of reality, which in and of itself is already symbolic. This whole thing runs on an archetypal symbolic engine. This whole thing runs on an archetypal symbolic engine. This whole thing comes from a metaverse. But we'll get to that next time. By gaining the runes, Odin acquires the language, the syntax, the diction of creation itself. Does that sound familiar? Sounds like the logos. I didn't say logos, I said the logos, when God was the Word and the Word was God. Interesting that those two concepts share such relevance to one another, although the Greeks defined the logos as more than just the word. The logos is the entire encapsulation of an archetype in its totality. So when we deal with the runes as the language of creation itself that Odin receives as payment or reward for the sacrifice that he made to differentiate his brand, what we now need to understand is that the revelation of the runes constitutes what we could call the ultimate form of information branding. He now possesses the unique, the powerful, and the deeply hidden IP of the cosmos. He now understands the most guarded intellectual property that the universe can offer, the very language of the creative act itself, which he then promptly uses to define and shape the world in his own image. This is also very funny because not only did Odin pierce his side, he branded himself, he marked his pain point, he also sacrificed an eye. An eye for an eye. Isn't branding the art of perception? So in order to gain a higher perception, he had to sacrifice a piece of his normal, mundane, earthly perception. Odin sacrificed pieces of his worldly sight in exchange for a deeper insight. He gave up one form of perception, one form of branding, in order to gain a more transcendent one. And in the very moment that he sees the runes, he is reborn. In the moment that he grasps the tool, his identity is permanently shifted from that of a powerful god to that of the wisest god in his entire pantheon. He becomes the god of ecstasy, poetry, and magic. In that moment, his new identity, his new brand, was built on his entire willingness to sacrifice, to endure, in order to gain a hidden awareness that others did not want to gain for themselves. But through this very radical act of differentiation, he becomes the most powerful brand amongst all of the brands, vying for attention, for worship, for praise, for veneration. Do you get me? Do you understand now? This is how you cut through the static. This is how you cut through the oversaturation of the modern market. Odin taught you the game if you were just willing to listen. So here are all the necessary correspondences to tie this thing up with a pretty bow. When Odin is hanging on Yggdrasil, the world tree, that is representative, that is symbolic of defining a niche, defining a unique point of view. A brand must endure the discomfort of being unique and alone to gain transcendent power in the modern market. When Odin pierces his own side with his own spear, that is symbolic of the necessity for authenticity and commitment, because a brand must be willing to wound itself. It must be willing to sacrifice resources, time, and comfort in order to stand true to its core values. In order for you to stand on business, you're gonna have to make some motherfucking sacrifices. Get over it. When Odin gains the knowledge of the runes, that is symbolic of acquiring a unique value proposition. The unique value proposition is not just some cool feature in your product. It is the fundamental systemic code that makes a brand distinct and powerful. Please understand that your unique value proposition is in no way, shape, or form separate from your unique point of view. They derive from one another. Your unique point of view is what's going to bring you your unique proposition. When Odin sacrifices his eye, that is symbolic of the clarity of focus needed to gain true insight within the market. The brand has to sacrifice distractions. Again, that's the worldly sight. You have to sacrifice buying into all of the market hype and focus solely on the essential purpose that your brand is here to serve. So please understand and take heed. Open up your motherfucking ears. Odin's myth suggests that the most powerful form of branding isn't about simply making a fucking product. It's about a self-chosen identity-defining ordeal that opens up and grants an incredible level of transformational awareness and authority, aka sovereignty. Live and direct from the mothership. This not gonna be on some other shit. Hitsuyowaku, sovereign identity architect, at your service. Orewa kakugachi gwandayo. Translation, I'm built different. And before I go, don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, if you are a creator, a founder, a disruptor, an innovator, a ethical entrepreneur looking to take your brand back to the future, then the information's on the screen. Hit me up. Let's work together. Let's make your dream an engineered reality. Peace.